بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا إنك أنت الجواد الكريم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the appendix to our series on Islamic legal maxims and their application in Islamic finance. We're looking at the Islamic attitude toward wealth and the objectives of the Sharia regarding wealth. In our last episode, we discussed the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ, at the end of the hadith, he said, "This wealth is green and sweet. If someone acquires it lawfully and spends it lawfully, what a blessed support it will be. But if anyone acquires it unlawfully, he is like one who eats but does not feel satisfied." And discussing some of the application of that statement, the nature of riba, it is insatiable because it works on this exponential curve. Compound interest means that the rate of increase begins to change and accelerate as time goes by. And so this sense of insatiability is one of the hallmarks of that riba system. And one of the most glaring examples of the rank injustice of this system, in 1973 the price of oil went up, and that caused a great financial difficulty to third world countries that didn't have oil. So they were forced to borrow in order to import enough oil for their economic needs. If you don't have oil, you don't have a modern economy. And so they felt that it was darura, it was a compelling need. And in 1979, after the Iranian Revolution, the price of oil shot up further. And what happened around that time also was that in America, the price of interest went through the roof. The Federal Reserve's interest rate was close to 20%, which is like unheard of. And so if that was in the US, then it also spread throughout the world. So a country like Nigeria, which was actually an oil exporter, it had trouble with its balance of payments, and it borrowed money. 20, 30 years later, the ruler of Nigeria, he mentioned that the amount of the original debt was $5 billion. And at the time that he spoke, Nigeria had already paid back $18 billion, and you know how much they still owed? $26 billion. So the amount that they owed was like 5 times more than they had originally incurred, even after they had paid triple, more than triple of the original debt. And I happened to be at a conference a couple of years ago in which one of the former rulers of Nigeria gave a talk, and he mentioned that, he came to power by a military coup, but he was, by all accounts, I've spoken to Nigerians who told me about this man, and they said that he was an upright man who really was trying to rid the society of corruption, and he was trying to do the right thing. And what he mentioned in the course of his talk was that they owed a certain amount of money to the IMF and to foreign, I think he was particularly talking about the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and they had a payment schedule with the IMF. So he decided this debt servicing, it's going to be a real problem for our economy in the future, and they want us to pay this amount, going to pay double, because they had oil. And so he started paying double what was required. And they came to him and said, no, you don't have to pay that much. Just pay what we asked you to pay. And he said, no, I want to. They said, no, you don't have to. No, but I insist. Well, within weeks or months, he was out of there. Somebody had made a coup against him. So why did that happen? Connect the dots. So you have this sense and this reality that this mathematical concept of riba is unsupportable in the natural world. And one of the impacts, or one of the effects that's driving the world economy, everything is driven by the need to make a certain amount of profit in order to be able to cover the interest payment on the debt. Is like an electric prod behind every enterprise in the world to increase, to grow. And there are limits to growth. This planet is only so big, and when you've ripped out this and that resource from here and there and depleted all the resources, the population will have to crash because there won't be enough resources to support the levels of human beings who are calling upon them. And so a sustainable economic system cannot be achieved when the whole system is being driven by the internal logic of riba. Let's return to texts of the Sharia regarding the Islamic attitude toward wealth. In Surah Al Imran, you have this passage which recognizes that there are these inherent or ingrained, these built-in tendencies in the human being to love certain aspects of the bounties of this life. Allah says, بَعْدَ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ زُيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ حُبُّ الشَّهَوَاتِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ وَالْبَنِينَ وَالْقَنَاطِيرِ الْمُقَنطَرَةِ مِنَ الذَّهَبِ وَالْفِضَّةِ وَالْخَيْلِ الْمُسَوَّمَةِ وَالْأَنْعَامِ وَالْحَرْثِ ذَلِكَ مَتَاعُ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَاللَّهُ عِنْدَهُ حُسْنُ الْمَآبِ. Beautified for mankind is love of the joys that come from women and offspring, and stored up heaps of gold and silver, and horses branded with the marks of their owners, and cattle and land. That is comfort of the life of the world. Allah, with Him, is a more excellent abode. So Allah is acknowledging that these things are built in your nature. Now some people say that, because it's not mentioned exactly who is beautifying these things for the human being, some said that it is shaitan who's beautifying them. That's one way to look at it, but it's not definitive. Another way to look at it is that it's built into the human nature, and Allah is the one who built us. So we have those inclinations, but they need to be balanced with the insight that Allah provides us. And part of that reality is that Allah is the ultimate owner and provider of the wealth, so it must be spent the way He says. And so one of those texts give us that instruction in Surah Isra, one of the previous prophets telling his people, وَآتِ ذَا الْقُرْبَى حَقَّهُ وَالْمِسْكِينَ وَابْنَ السَّبِيلِ وَلَا تُبَذِّرْ تَبْذِيرًا إِنَّ الْمُبَذِّرِينَ كَانُوا إِخْوَانَ الشَّيَاطِينَ وَكَانَ الشَّيْطَانُ لِرَبِّهِ كَفُورًا. Give the kinsman his due, and the needy and the wayfarer, and do not squander your wealth wastefully. Those who squander are brothers of Satan, and Satan is most ungrateful to his Lord. This is the translation of Abdul Halim. And then in the instruction that was, the advice that was given to Qarun in Surah Qasas, it's a really concise and comprehensive kind of way to look at wealth and what to do with it and the relationship between this world and the hereafter. وَابْتَغِي فِي مَا آتَاكَ اللَّهُ الدَّارَ الْآخِرَةَ وَلَا تَنْسَ نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا وَأَحْسِنْ كَمَا أَحْسَنَ اللَّهُ إِلَيْكَ وَلَا تَبْغِ الْفَسَادَ فِي الْأَرْضِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُفْسِدِينَ. Seek the life to come by means of what Allah has granted you, but do not neglect your rightful share in this world. Do good to others as Allah has done good to you. Do not seek to spread corruption in the land, for Allah does not love those who do this. Okay, we'll take a break and come back, inshallah. Are being sold in the world, the wages of the people who produce them are not enough for them to buy everything that's being produced. And so, according to Marx, that was the essential paradox of capitalism. And when I mentioned that to the dean of the School of Islamic Banking, university where I study, he said, well, one of the things that he wasn't taking into account is what's called, the difference between the volume of money and the flow of money. So there's a lot more value to the goods and services in an economy than there is the actual dollars that are being used to pay for those goods and services, or rupees, or whatever the currency is, because the same dollar is used in my transaction here, and then the person who received it is using it in a transaction with somebody else, and then that's used in a transaction with somebody else. And so the flow of money through the system is like a flow of blood. So there's a certain volume of blood in your body, and then there's a speed at which it circulates. And so both of those things need to be taken into account with regard to, is there enough money in the system to take care of all the transactions that people need to undertake? If there isn't enough wealth in the hands of the poor, then eventually the stuff that's being produced, there won't be enough buyers, especially as the percentage of the people in the society who are poor continues to increase. And we mentioned in a previous episode with regard to the distribution of a certain kind of wealth, that windfall profits that fall to the Muslims, that they're divided among these certain groups, and then Allah mentioned the rationale for why those groups should be given this wealth. He said, كَيْ لَا يَكُونَ دُولَةً بَيْنَ الْأَغْنِيَاءِ مِنْكُمْ, in order that wealth doesn't become something that's just circulating amongst the wealthy of you, the rich in the society. So the encouragement for people to undertake entrepreneurial activities, to do business, this is well known in Islam. And one of the aspects of the Islamic system is to penalize wealth that's just simply being saved. Because if you look at the definition of money, the classic kind of things that economists talk about is that money is a medium of exchange, it's a measure of value, and it's a store of value. So its function as a medium of exchange and its function as a store of value are conflicting objectives. If you have a lot of money and you put it under your pillow and you've saved it in the form of gold or whatever, and that's your savings, and it's just sitting there in a safe somewhere, then that's money that's been taken out of circulation from the society, and it cannot be used by people for their exchanges. So what happens? What's the Islamic attitude towards saved wealth? Well, after a year, you're going to have to pay 2.5% on it. So, 2.5% times 40 would mean that after 40 years, your wealth would be gone. That's if you took 2% from the original every year. Obviously, that's on a sliding scale, because the second year, if there's 2.5% to be taken from what was just an amount that hasn't changed except for the first year's 2.5%, then what's being taken out of that would be slightly less than what was taken the first year. So it would take longer than 40 years to eat it all up, but if you leave it around long enough, eventually zakat will eat up all of that wealth. And so that's a penalty being imposed by the lawgiver for monopolizing wealth, monopolizing money, and diverting it from its primary function, which is medium of exchange. Now, there's a really interesting verse in Surah An-Nisa. It says, وَلَا تُؤْتُوا السُّفَهَاءَ أَمْوَالَكُمُ الَّتِي جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ قِيَامًا. Do not entrust your property to the feeble-minded, that which Allah has made a means of support for you. So it's highlighting the role of wealth in human life. It is the means of support. It's a very, very important function. Now, with regard to this issue of zakat and wealth, Allah says in Surah Tawbah, وَالَّذِينَ يَكْنِزُونَ الذَّهَبَ وَالْفِضَّةَ وَلَا يُنْفِقُونَهَا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ فَبَشِّرْهُمْ بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ. The opinion of the overwhelming majority of jurists is that this refers to wealth on which zakat has not been paid. And then there's other aspects of the redistribution or the circulation of wealth objective of the Sharia, including inheritance. You know, in some legal systems of other peoples, like in Europe, only the eldest son would inherit land from his father. Women didn't inherit at all in traditional Europe before the modern age. And the second and third, fourth sons, they didn't get anything either. And in Islam, there are fixed portions for everybody who has direct relationship with the deceased. So from generation to generation, wealth would be distributed within the society also. Another major objective of the Sharia is fairness and transparency in financial practices. The basic rule of the Sharia is that every kind of transaction is lawful until proven otherwise. And the implications of contracts are that they create rights and responsibilities, and that it's an obligation. It becomes binding to fulfill the obligations that one has accepted by entering into the contract. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu awfu bil uqud. In Surah Al-Ma'idah, O you who believe, fulfill your contract obligations. And because we're running short, let me just read this passage from Surah Al-Shu'ara. This is the one from a previous prophet instructing his people. Give full measure, and be not of those who give less than the due. Weigh with correct scales. Do not deprive people of what is theirs. Do not spread corruption on earth. So these are all related to giving people what is their due. And with regard to transparency, I mean, the classic evidence for that is the hadith of Abu Huraira. The Prophet ﷺ was passing through the marketplace, and there was somebody selling grain. There was a big heap of it. And the Prophet ﷺ, he put his hand into the pile, and the grain on the inside was wet, and there was dry grain on top. And he asked the man, what's going on here? Why is the stuff wet on the inside? And he said, well, the rain got on it. Asabatu sama. And the Prophet ﷺ said, why didn't you put the wet part where people can see it? Man ghasha falaysa minna. Whoever deceives is not of us. So that's a clear indication for the necessity for transparency and forthrightness. And in another hadith he said that if the two parties in the transaction disclose everything relevant to what the other party needs to know in the exchange process, then they will be blessed in their transaction. And if there is concealing going on, then the barakah, the blessing of the transaction, will be erased. Another hadith related to that is the prohibition of munabadha. This was a kind of a sale where each person would toss a garment to the other, and catching it meant that you bought it, and you didn't have a chance to actually look at it. So this negates the idea of knowing what it is that they're buying, and so it was prohibited. So we've come to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahu a'lam.